Chapter 37 honorably accounts for Mr. Weller's absence by describing a soiree to which he was invited and went. Also relates how he was entrusted by Mr. Pickwick with a private mission of delicacy and importance. "Mr. Weller," said Mrs. Craddock upon the morning of this very eventful day, "here's a letter for you." "Very odd, that," said Sam. "I'm afraid there must be something the matter, for I don't recollect any gentleman in my circle of acquaintance as is capable of writing one." "Perhaps something uncommon has taken place," observed Mrs. Craddock. "It must be something very uncommon indeed, as could produce a letter out of any friend of mine," replied Sam, shaking his head dubiously. "Nothing less than a natural convulsion, as the young gentleman observed when he was taken with the fits." "It can't be from the governor," said Sam, looking at the direction. "He always prints, I know, 'cause he learnt writin' from the big bills in the booking offices. It's a very strange thing now, where this here letter can a come from." As Sam said this, he did what a great many people do when they are uncertain about the writer of a note, looked at the seal, and then at the front, and then at the back, and then at the sides, and then at the superscription, and, as a last resource, thought perhaps he might as well look at the inside and try to find out from that. "It's wrote on gilt-edged paper," said Sam as he unfolded it, "and sealed in bronze wax with the top of a door key. Now for it." And with a very grave face, Mr. Weller slowly read as follows: "A select company of the Bath Footmen presents their compliments to Mr. Weller and requests the pleasure of his company this evening to a friendly soiree, consisting of a boiled leg of mutton with the usual trimmings. The soiree to be on table at 9:30 punctually." This was enclosed in another note, which ran thus: "Mr. John Smalker, the gentleman who had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Weller at the house of their mutual acquaintance, Mr. Bantam, a few days since, begs to enclose Mr. Weller the herewith invitation. If Mr. Weller will call on Mr. John Smalker at 9:00, Mr. John Smalker will have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Weller. Signed, John Smalker." The envelope was directed to Blank Weller Esquire at Mr. Pickwick's, and in a parenthesis in the left-hand corner were the words "Airy Bell," as an instruction to the bearer. "Well," said Sam, "this is comin' it rather powerful, this is. I never heard of a boiled leg of mutton called a soiree before. I wonder what they'd call a roast one." However, without waiting to debate the point, Sam at once betook himself into the presence of Mr. Pickwick and requested leave of absence for that evening, which was readily granted. With this permission and the street door key, Sam Weller issued forth a little before the appointed time and strolled leisurely towards Queen Square, which he no sooner gained than he had the satisfaction of beholding Mr. John Smalker leaning his powdered head against a lamp-post at a short distance off, smoking a cigar through an amber tube. "How do you do, Mr. Weller?" said Mr. John Smalker, raising his hat gracefully with one hand, while he gently waved the other in a condescending manner. "How do you do, sir?" "Why, reasonably convalescent," replied Sam. "How do you find yourself, my dear feller?" "Only so-so," said Mr. John Smalker. "Ah, you've been working too hard," observed Sam. "I was fearful you would. It won't do, you know. You must not give way to that uncompromising spirit of yours." "It's not so much that, Mr. Weller," replied Mr. John Smalker, "as bad wine. I'm afraid I've been dissipating." "Oh, that's it, is it?" said Sam. "That's a very bad complaint, that. And yet the temptation, you see, Mr. Weller," observed Mr. John Smalker. "Ah, to be sure," said Sam. "Plunged into the very vortex of society, you know, Mr. Weller," said Mr. John Smalker with a sigh. "Dreadful indeed," rejoined Sam. "But it's always the way," said Mr. John Smalker. "If your destiny leads you into public life and public station, you must expect to be subjected to temptations which other people is free from, Mr. Weller." "Precisely what my uncle said when he went into the public line," remarked Sam, "and very right the old gentleman was, for he drank himself to death in something less than a quarter." Mr. John Smalker looked deeply indignant at any parallel being drawn between himself and the deceased gentleman in question, but as Sam's face was in the most immovable state of calmness, he thought better of it, and looked affable again. "Perhaps we had better be walking," said Mr. Smalker, consulting a copper timepiece which dwelt at the bottom of a deep watch-pocket, and was raised to the surface by means of a black string with a copper key at the other end. "Perhaps we had," replied Sam, "or they'll overdo the soiree, and that'll spoil it." "Have you drank the waters, Mr. Weller?" inquired his companion as they walked towards High Street. "Once," replied Sam. "What did you think of them, sir?" "I thought they was particularly unpleasant," replied Sam. "Ah," said Mr. John Smalker, "you dislike the kilobeat taste, perhaps." "I don't know much about that there," said Sam. "I thought they had a very strong flavor of warm flat irons." "That is the kilobeat, Mr. Weller," observed Mr. John Smalker contemptuously. Well, if it is, it's a very inexpressive word, that's all, said Sam. It may be, but I ain't much in the chemical line myself, so I can't say. And here, to the great horror of Mr. John Smauker, Sam Weller began to whistle. I beg your pardon, Mr. Weller, said Mr. John Smauker, agonized at the exceeding ungenteel sound. Will you take my arm? Thank ye. You're very good, but I won't deprive you of it, replied Sam. I've rather a way of putting my hands in my pockets, if it's all the same to you. As Sam said this, he suited the action to the word and whistled far louder than before. This way, said his new friend, apparently much relieved as they turned down a by-street. We shall soon be there. Shall we? Said Sam, quite unmoved by the announcement of his close vicinity to the select footman of Bath. Yes, said Mr. John Smauker. Don't be alarmed, Mr. Weller. Oh, no, said Sam. You'll see some very handsome uniforms, Mr. Weller, continued John Smauker. And perhaps you'll find some of the gentlemen rather high at first, you know, but they'll soon come round. That's very kind on 'em, replied Sam. And you know, resumed Mr. John Smauker with an air of sublime protection, you know, as you're a stranger, perhaps they'll be rather hard upon you at first. They won't be very cruel, though, will they? Inquired Sam. No, no, replied Mr. John Smauker, pulling forth the fox's head and taking a gentlemanly pinch. There are some funny dogs among us, and they will have their joke, you know, but you mustn't mind them, I'll try and bear up against such a regular knockdown of talent, replied Sam. That's right, said Mr. John Smauker, putting forth his fox's head and elevating his own. I'll stand by you. By this time, they had reached a small greengrocer's shop, which Mr. John Smauker entered, followed by Sam, who, the moment he got behind him, relapsed into a series of the very broadest and most unmitigated grins, and manifested other demonstrations of being in a highly enviable state of inward merriment. Crossing the greengrocer's shop and putting their hats on the stairs in the little passage behind it, they walked into a small parlor, and here the full splendor of the scene burst upon Mr. Weller's view. A couple of tables were put together in the middle of the parlor, covered with 3 or 4 cloths of different ages and dates of washing, arranged to look as much like one as the circumstances of the case would allow. Upon these were laid knives and forks for 6 or 8 people. Some of the knife handles were green, others red, and a few yellow, and as all the forks were black, the combination of colors was exceedingly striking. Plates for a corresponding number of guests were warming behind the fender, and the guests themselves were warming before it, the chief and most important of whom appeared to be a stoutish gentleman in a bright crimson coat with long tails, vividly red breeches, and a cocked hat, who was standing with his back to the fire and had apparently just entered, before, besides retaining his cocked hat on his head, he carried in his hand a high stick, such as gentlemen of his profession usually elevate in a sloping position over the roofs of carriages. "Smauker, my lad, your fin," said the gentleman with the cocked hat. Mr. Smauker dovetailed the top joint of his right-hand little finger into that of the gentleman with the cocked hat, and said he was charmed to see him looking so well. "Well, they tell me I am looking pretty blooming," said the man with the cocked hat, "and it's a wonder, too. I've been following our old woman about 2 hours a day for the last fortnight, and if a constant contemplation of the manner in which she hooks and eyes that infernal lavender-colored old gown of hers behind isn't enough to throw anybody into a low state of despondency for life, stop my quarter salary." At this, the assembled selections laughed very heartily, and one gentleman in a yellow waistcoat with a coach-trimming border whispered a neighbor in green foil smalls that Tuckle was in spirits tonight. "By the by," said Mr. Tuckle, "Smauker, my boy, you—" The remainder of the sentence was forwarded into Mr. John Smauker's ear by whisper. "Oh, dear me, I quite forgot," said Mr. John Smauker. "Gentlemen, my friend, Mr. Weller." "Sorry to keep the fire off you, Weller," said Mr. Tuckle with a familiar nod. "Hope you're not cold, Weller." "Not by no means, Blazes," replied Sam. "It'd be a very chilly subject as felt cold when you stood opposite. You'd save coals if they put you behind the fender in the waiting room at a public office, you would." As this retort appeared to convey rather a personal allusion to Mr. Tuckle's crimson livery, that gentleman looked majestic for a few seconds, but gradually edging away from the fire, broke into a forced smile and said it wasn't bad. "Very much obliged for your good opinion, sir," replied Sam. "We shall get on by degrees, I dare say. We'll try a better one by and by." At this point, the conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a gentleman in orange-colored plush, accompanied by another selection in purple cloth with a great extent of stocking. The newcomers having been welcomed by the old ones, Mr. Tuckle put the question that supper be ordered in, which was carried unanimously. The greengrocer and his wife then arranged upon the table a boiled leg of mutton, hot, with caper sauce, turnips, and potatoes. Mr. Tuckle took the chair and was supported at the other end of the board by the gentleman in orange plush. The greengrocer put on a pair of wash-leather gloves to hand the plates with, and stationed himself behind Mr. Tuckle's chair. "Harris," said Mr. Tuckle in a commanding tone. "Sir," said the greengrocer, "have you got your gloves on?" "Yes, sir." "Then take the kiver off." "Yes, sir." The greengrocer did as he was told with a show of great humility, and obsequiously handed Mr. Tuckle the carving knife, in doing which he accidentally gaped. "What do you mean by that, sir?" said Mr. Tuckle with great asperity. "I beg your pardon, sir," replied the crestfallen greengrocer. "I didn't mean to do it, sir. I was up very late last night, sir." "I tell you what my opinion of you is, Harris," said Mr. Tuckle with a most impressive air. "You're a vulgar beast." "I hope, gentlemen," said Harris, "that you won't be severe with me, gentlemen. I am very much obliged to you indeed, gentlemen, for your patronage, and also for your recommendations, gentlemen, whenever additional assistance in waiting is required. I hope, gentlemen, I give satisfaction." "No, you don't, sir," said Mr. Tuckle. "Very far from it, sir." "We consider you an inattentive rascal," said the gentleman in the orange plush. "And a low thief," added the gentleman in the green foil smalls. "And an unreclaimable blackguard," added the gentleman in purple. The poor greengrocer bowed very humbly while these little epithets were bestowed upon him in the true spirit of the very smallest tyranny, and when everybody had said something to show his superiority, Mr. Tuckle proceeded to carve the leg of mutton and to help the company. This important business of the evening had hardly commenced when the door was thrown briskly open, and another gentleman in a light blue suit and leaden buttons made his appearance. "Against the rules," said Mr. Tuckle. "Too late, too late." No, positively, I couldn't help it," said the gentleman in blue. "I appealed to the company. An affair of gallantry now, an appointment to the theater." "Oh, that indeed," said the gentleman in the orange plush. "Yes, really now, honor bright," said the man in blue. "I made a promise to fetch our youngest daughter at 10:30, and she is such an uncommonly fine gal that I really hadn't the heart to disappoint her. No offense to the present company, sir, but a petticoat, sir, is irrevocable." "I begin to suspect there's something in that quarter," said Tuckle, as the newcomer took his seat next to Sam. "I've remarked once or twice that she leans very heavy on your shoulder when she gets in and out of the carriage." "Oh, really, Tuckle, you shouldn't," said the man in blue. "It's not fair. I may have said to one or two friends that she was a very divine creature, and had refused one or two offers without any obvious cause. But no, indeed, Tuckle. Before strangers, too. It's not right. You shouldn't. Delicacy, my dear friend, delicacy." And the man in blue, pulling up his neckerchief and adjusting his coat cuffs, nodded and frowned as if there were more behind, which he could say if he liked, but was bound in honor to suppress. The man in blue, being a light-haired, stiff-necked, free and easy sort of footman, with a swaggering air and pert face, had attracted Mr. Weller's special attention at first, but when he began to come out in this way, Sam felt more than ever disposed to cultivate his acquaintance, so he launched himself into the conversation at once with characteristic independence. "Your health, sir," said Sam. "I like your conversation much. I think it's very pretty." At this the man in blue smiled, as if it were a compliment he was well used to, but looked approvingly on Sam at the same time, and said he hoped he should be better acquainted with him, for without any flattery at all, he seemed to have the makings of a very nice fellow about him, and to be just the man after his own heart. "You're very good, sir," said Sam. "What a lucky fellow you are." "How do you mean?" inquired the gentleman in blue. "That 'ere young lady," replied Sam. "She knows what's what, she does." "Ah, I see." Mr. Weller closed one eye and shook his head from side to side, in a manner which was highly gratifying to the personal vanity of the gentleman in blue. "I'm afraid you are a cunning fellow, Mr. Weller," said that individual. No, said Sam. "I leave all that there to you. It's a great deal more in your way than mine," as the gentleman on the right side of the garden wall said to the man on the wrong one, when the mad bull was a-coming up the lane. Well, Mr. Weller," said the gentleman in blue, "I think she has remarked my air and manner, Mr. Weller." "I should think she couldn't very well be off of that," said Sam. "Have you any little thing of that kind in hand?" inquired the favored gentleman in blue, drawing a toothpick from his waistcoat pocket. "Not exactly," said Sam. "There's no daughters at my place, else of course I should have made up to one on 'em. As it is, I don't think I can do anything under a female marquis. I might keep up with the young woman a large property as hadn't a title if she made a very fierce love to me, not else." "Of course not, Mr. Weller," said the gentleman in blue. "One can't be troubled, you know, and we know, Mr. Weller, we who are men of the world, that a good uniform must work its way with the women, sooner or later. In fact, that's the only thing, between you and me, that makes the service worth entering into." "Just so," said Sam. "That's it, of course." When this confidential dialogue had gone thus far, glasses were placed round, and every gentleman ordered what he liked best, before the public house shut up. The gentleman in blue and the man in orange, who were the chief exquisites of the party, ordered cold shrub and water, but with the others, gin and water, sweet, appeared to be the favorite beverage. Sam called the greengrocer a desperate villain, and ordered a large bowl of punch, two circumstances which seemed to raise him very much in the opinion of the selections. "Gentlemen," said the man in blue, with an air of the most consummate dandyism, "I'll give you the ladies. Come." "Here, here," said Sam, "the young missuses." Here there was a loud cry of "Order!" and Mr. John Smauker, as the gentleman who had introduced Mr. Weller into that company, begged to inform him that the word he had just made use of was unparliamentary. "Which word was that there, sir?" inquired Sam. "Missuses, sir," replied Mr. John Smauker with an alarming frown. "We don't recognize such distinctions here." "Oh, very good," said Sam. "Then I'll amend the observation and call them the dear creatures, if Blazes will allow me." Some doubt appeared to exist in the mind of the gentleman in the green foil smalls whether the chairman could be legally appealed to as Blazes, but as the company seemed more disposed to stand upon their own rights than his, the question was not raised. The man with the cocked hat breathed short and looked long at Sam, but apparently thought it as well to say nothing in case he should get the worst of it. After a short silence, a gentleman in an embroidered coat, reaching down to his heels, and a waistcoat of the same which kept one half of his legs warm, stirred his gin and water with great energy, and putting himself upon his feet all at once by a violent effort, said he was desirous of offering a few remarks to the company, whereupon the person in the cocked hat, he had no doubt that the company would be very happy to hear any remarks that the man in the long coat might wish to offer. "I feel a great delicacy, gentlemen, in coming forward," said the man in the long coat, having the misfortune to be a coachman, and being only admitted as an honorary member of these agreeable soirees, "but I do feel myself bound, gentlemen, drove into a corner, if I may use the expression, to make known an afflicting circumstance which has come to my knowledge, which has happened, I may say, within the scope of my everyday contemplation. Gentlemen, our friend Mr. Whiffers," everybody looked at the individual in orange, "our friend Mr. Whiffers has resigned." Universal astonishment fell upon the hearers. Each gentleman looked in his neighbor's face and then transferred his glance to the upstanding coachman. "You may well be surprised, gentlemen," said the coachman. "I will not venture to state the reasons of this irreparable loss to the service, but I will beg Mr. Whiffers to state them himself for the improvement and imitation of his admiring friends." The suggestion being loudly approved of, Mr. Whiffers explained. He said he certainly could have wished to have continued to hold the appointment he had just resigned. The uniform was extremely rich and expensive, the females of the family was most agreeable, and the duties of the situation was not, he was bound to say, too heavy, the principal service that was required of him being that he should look out of the hall window as much as possible, in company with another gentleman who had also resigned. He could have wished to have spared that company the painful and disgusting detail on which he was about to enter, but as the explanation had been demanded of him, he had no alternative but to state, boldly and distinctly, that he had been required to eat cold meat. It is impossible to conceive the disgust which this avowal awakened in the bosoms of the hearers. Loud cries of "shame," mingled with groans and hisses, prevailed for a quarter of an hour. Mr. Whiffers then added that he feared a portion of this outrage might be traced to his own forbearing and accommodating disposition. He had a distinct recollection of having once consented to eat salt butter, and he had moreover, on an occasion of sudden sickness in the house, so far forgotten himself as to carry a coal scuttle up to the second floor. He trusted he had not lowered himself in the good opinion of his friends by this frank confession of his faults, and he hoped the promptness with which he had resented the last unmanly outrage on his feelings to which he had referred would reinstate him in their good opinion if he had. Mr. Whiffers' address was responded to with a shout of admiration, and the health of the interesting martyr was drunk in a most enthusiastic manner. For this, the martyr returned thanks and proposed their visitor, Mr. Weller, a gentleman who he had not the pleasure of an intimate acquaintance with, but who was the friend of Mr. John Smauker, which was a sufficient letter of recommendation to any society of gentlemen whatever, or wherever. On this account, he should have been disposed to have given Mr. Weller's health with all the honors, if his friends had been drinking wine, but as they were taking spirits by way of a change, and as it might be inconvenient to empty a tumbler at every toast, he should propose that the honors be understood. At the conclusion of this speech, everybody took a sip in honor of Sam, and Sam, having ladled out and drunk 2 full glasses of punch in honor of himself, returned thanks in a neat speech. "Very much obliged to you, old fellers," said Sam. ladling away at the punch in the most unembarrassed manner possible, for this here compliment, which coming from such a quarter is very overwhelming. I've heard a good deal on you as a body, but I will say that I never thought you was such uncommon nice men as I find you are. I only hope you'll take care of yourselves, and not compromise nothing of your dignity, which is a very charming thing to see when one's out a-walking, and has always made me very happy to look at, ever since I was a boy about half as high as the brass-headed stick of my very respectable friend Blazes there. As to the victim of oppression and the suit of brimstone, all I can say of him is that I hope he'll get just as good a berth as he deserves, in which case it's very little cold soiree as ever he'll be troubled with again. Here Sam sat down with a pleasant smile, and his speech having been vociferously applauded, the company broke up. "Why, you don't mean to say you're a-goin', old feller," said Sam Weller to his friend, Mr. John Smauker. "I must indeed," said Mr. Smauker. "I promise Bantam." "Oh, very well," said Sam. "That's another thing. Perhaps he'd resign if you disappointed him. You ain't a-going, Blazes?" "Yes, I am," said the man with the cocked hat. "What, and leave 3/4 of a bowl of punch behind you?" said Sam. "Nonsense. Sit down again." Mr. Tuckle was not proof against this invitation. He laid aside the cocked hat and stick which he had just taken up, and said he would have 1 glass for good fellowship's sake. As the gentleman in blue went home the same way as Mr. Tuckle, he was prevailed upon to stop too. When the punch was about half gone, Sam ordered in some oysters from the greengrocer's shop, and the effect of both was so extremely exhilarating that Mr. Tuckle, dressed out with the cocked hat and stick, danced the frog hornpipe among the shells on the table, while the gentleman in blue played an accompaniment upon an ingenious musical instrument formed of a hair comb upon a curl paper. At last, when the punch was all gone and the night nearly so, they sallied forth to see each other home. Mr. Tuckle no sooner got into the open air than he was seized with a sudden desire to lie on the curbstone. Sam thought it would be a pity to contradict him, and so let him have his own way. As the cocked hat would have been spoiled if left there, Sam very considerately flattened it down on the head of the gentleman in blue, and putting the big stick in his hand, propped him up against his own street door, rang the bell, and walked quietly home. At a much earlier hour next morning than his usual time of rising, Mr. Pickwick walked downstairs completely dressed and rang the bell. "Sam," said Mr. Pickwick when Mr. Weller appeared in reply to the summons, "shut the door." Mr. Weller did so. "There was an unfortunate occurrence here last night, Sam," said Mr. Pickwick, "which gave Mr. Winkle some cause to apprehend violence from Mr. Dowler." "So I have heard from the old lady downstairs, sir," replied Sam. "And I'm sorry to say, Sam," and continued Mr. Pickwick with a most perplexed countenance, "that in dread of this violence, Mr. Winkle has gone away." "Gone away?" said Sam. "Left the house early this morning without the slightest previous communication with me," replied Mr. Pickwick, "and is gone I know not where." "He should have stopped and fought it out, sir," replied Sam contemptuously. It wouldn't take much to settle that there Dowler, sir." "Well, Sam," said Mr. Pickwick, "I may have my doubts of his great bravery and determination also, but however that may be, Mr. Winkle is gone. He must be found, Sam, found and brought back to me." "And suppose he won't come back, sir," said Sam. "He must be made, Sam," said Mr. Pickwick. "Who's to do it, sir?" inquired Sam with a smile. "You," replied Mr. Pickwick. "Very good, sir." With these words, Mr. Weller left the room, and immediately afterwards was heard to shut the street door. In 2 hours' time he returned with so much coolness as if he had been dispatched on the most ordinary message possible, and brought the information that an individual in every respect answering Mr. Winkle's description had gone over to Bristol that morning by the branch coach from that Royal Hotel. "Sam," said Mr. Pickwick, grasping his hand, "you're a capital fellow, an invaluable fellow. You must follow him, Sam." "Certainly, sir," replied Mr. Weller. "The instant you discover him, write to me immediately, Sam," said Mr. Pickwick. "If he attempts to run away from you, knock him down or lock him up. You have my full authority, Sam." "I'll be very careful, sir," rejoined Sam. "You'll tell him," said Mr. Pickwick, "that I am highly excited, highly displeased, and naturally indignant at the very extraordinary course he has thought proper to pursue." "I will, sir," replied Sam. "You'll tell him," said Mr. Pickwick, "that if he does not come back to this very house with you, he will come back with me, for I will come and fetch him." "I'll mention that there, sir," rejoined Sam. "You think you can find him, Sam?" said Mr. Pickwick, looking earnestly in his face. "Oh, I'll find him if he's anywhere," rejoined Sam with great confidence. "Very well," said Mr. Pickwick. "Then the sooner you go, the better." With these instructions, Mr. Pickwick placed a sum of money in the hands of his faithful servitor, and ordered him to start for Bristol immediately in pursuit of the fugitive. Sam put a few necessaries in a carpet-bag and was ready for starting. He stopped when he had got to the end of the passage, and walking quietly back, thrust his head in at the parlor door. "Sir," whispered Sam. "Well, Sam?" said Mr. Pickwick. "I fully understands my instructions, do I, sir?" inquired Sam. "I hope so," said Mr. Pickwick. It's regularly understood about the knocking down, is it, sir? Inquired Sam. Perfectly, replied Pickwick. Thoroughly. Do what you think necessary. You have my orders. Sam gave a nod of intelligence and, withdrawing his head from the door, set forth on his pilgrimage with a light heart.